The news of my father's death didn't come as a surprise. It had been a long time coming, a culmination of the reckless deals he'd been making over the years, the empty smiles he'd plastered on his face as he buried the truths that were slowly destroying our family. But still, the weight of it hit me like a truck. I hadn't spoken to my father in over 5 years. There had been no room for conversation after I left home. After I realized that the family I had spent so much time trying to please didn't even see me for who I was. My father's empire had always been more important than anything else to him, including me, and once I realized that, I walked away. But now, his death had brought me back. The invitation to the will reading was formal, distant. A part of me considered ignoring it. I wasn't sure why I even felt compelled to attend. Perhaps it was to see how the rest of them were going to react to his passing. Or maybe it was just a final act of defiance to remind them that I existed. That I wasn't some forgotten casualty of their game. The weather outside the conference room was gray, overcast, mirroring the heavy air inside the building. I stepped into the cold, sterile conference room of Walker Investments, the company my father had founded decades ago. The smell of leather chairs, freshly polished wood, and expensive cologne filled the air, a reminder that even in death, everything in this family came at a cost. The room was immaculate, the glass windows letting in muted light, casting shadows on the faces of the people who would determine my fate today. As I stepped into the room, all eyes turned to me, not with warmth, but with expectation. There was my younger brother Ethan, already seated at the table, looking stiff and uncomfortable, his eyes avoiding mine. I could see the faint tremor in his fingers as he gripped the edge of his glass. He had always been the obedient son, the one who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. His posture screamed discomfort, like a man in an ill-fitting suit trying to pretend it was made for him. Ethan had always been the one to keep the peace, never stirring the pot. He had grown up in the shadows of our father's expectations, and somehow, I knew that he was still trying to live up to them. At the head of the table sat Michael Hargrove, the CFO and closest confidant of my father. He was the type of man who always looked like he had something to hide, a perpetual smile on his lips but something cold behind his eyes. He looked at me and nodded, as if we were still business partners rather than estranged family. But I could see it. The moment he laid eyes on me, something flickered in his gaze, something that couldn't be hidden. Michael was the kind of man who thrived on secrets, on power, and I was certain that he had been planning for this moment for years, perhaps. It was always about who held the reins, who controlled the family fortune, and who would end up with the company. And I had a feeling it wasn't going to be me. And then there was Lauren, my father's second wife, and now a permanent fixture in this family's twisted affairs. Her long, carefully coiffed hair and perfectly tailored outfit gave her the air of someone who had never experienced a moment of discomfort. She was the kind of woman who thrived in the chaos my father created, and I knew she was going to play her part in whatever was about to unfold. She had never been a mother to me, never offered anything more than a polite smile at family gatherings, but I knew she was a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. "Thank you all for being here," Michael began, his voice as smooth as ever, but there was something more forced in it today. "We are here to read the will of Arthur Walker, and to discuss the distribution of his assets." I sat in silence, waiting. This wasn't a reading of a will, it was a game of control, of power. And I knew Michael had been planning for this moment for years, perhaps. It was always about who held the reins, who controlled the family fortune, and who would end up with the company. And I had a feeling it wasn't going to be me. The lawyer, Miss Harrison, sat quietly at her desk, flipping through the pages of the will. The room was still, the tension palpable. I watched her face, searching for any sign of what was coming. But she was professional, as always. Her eyes didn't betray a single emotion, as if she were used to being the silent observer in these sorts of power plays. And then, she began. "To my beloved wife, Lauren," she read. "I leave the beachfront property in Malibu, the collection of rare art, and a sum of $10 million in liquid assets." I couldn't help but let out a quiet laugh. Lauren was the one who had been by his side through every mistake, every shady deal, Every backroom negotiation. She had always been the one to tell him what he wanted to hear, no matter the cost. And now, she was being rewarded with more than enough to continue her life of luxury without a care in the world. Ethan Walker, Miss Harrison continued, you are to inherit the downtown apartment, the private jet, and a trust fund of $25 million. I watched as Ethan shifted in his seat, a mixture of pride and discomfort on his face. He had always been the one who played by the rules, the one who never rocked the boat. And in this family, that was enough to get you what you wanted. The good son who would always stay in line, no matter what happened. But then, there was the part I had been waiting for. Claire Walker, Miss Harrison said, her voice steady, almost too steady. I leave the remaining shares of Walker Investments, control of the company, and an amount equal to $50 million in liquid assets. The room went silent. I felt my pulse quicken, my heart pounding in my chest. I had expected something like this, but not in this way. Not like this. My father, the man who had turned his back on me years ago, had left me his empire, a legacy that I had never asked for, but now seemed to come with more strings than I was prepared to deal with. But the look on Michael's face was priceless. He was caught off guard. His perfect, manipulative smile faltered just for a second. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a gift. This was a calculated move. Miss Walker, if you'll excuse me, Michael said, his voice sharp as he stood up, trying to regain his composure. I think there's been some mistake. You're not prepared for this. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I just stared back at him. Do you think my father didn't know what he was doing? I asked quietly, my voice steady, but with a dangerous edge to it. Do you think you can control me like you controlled everything else? The room was still, but there was a shift in the air. It was as if I had just thrown a stone into a calm, reflective pool. The ripples were starting to spread. Don't mistake this for a gift, Michael. I continued, my words slow and deliberate. This is a reminder. A reminder that I'm not just another person you can push aside. He narrowed his eyes, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. I had no idea what this would mean for me in the long run, but in that moment, I knew one thing for sure: the battle had only just begun. And I wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not ever. As I stood up from the table, I could feel the eyes of my family on me, but I didn't care. I had just inherited something far more dangerous than money. I had inherited a war. The drive back from the will reading was one of the longest I'd ever experienced. I should have felt triumphant. But instead, a strange emptiness settled over me. I was walking into something far larger than I had ever anticipated. Something that had been brewing for years. And now, it was mine to carry. The car's engine hummed softly. But my mind was anything but peaceful. Thoughts about what I had inherited kept swirling: the company, the assets, the power. All of it felt like a heavy burden, a legacy that had been thrust upon me by a man who had never truly seen me, but now, in his death, I had become the unwilling heir to his empire. I couldn't deny the rush of adrenaline that surged through me when Miss Harrison read my name aloud as the inheritor. There was something empowering about it, the realization that I now had the control, the decision-making power, and the weight of the Walker name behind me. But I wasn't stupid. I knew that control was a double-edged sword. It came with strings, and I would have to navigate them carefully. As the city skyline emerged in front of me, I turned onto the exit ramp, my apartment not far off. The streets were busy, the sounds of the city filling the air. But inside, it felt quieter than ever. There was a part of me that wanted to feel joy. But all I felt was a simmering anger, a deep-seated frustration that had been building for years. My father's legacy wasn't something I had ever wanted, not in this form, not with the price that came with it. I parked the car in front of my building, letting the engine idle for a moment as I stared at the worn-out brick of the building. It had been home for years, a place where I could hide from everything and everyone. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and it was the only place where I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. But now, with the inheritance hanging over me. That safety felt like a distant memory. I grabbed my bag, my fingers brushing over the corner of the envelope Grandpa had given me, the one I hadn't opened yet. It felt heavier now, almost as if it had a life of its own, waiting to reveal its secrets. I wasn't ready for what was inside, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight without knowing. The apartment was dark when I stepped inside. I flipped on the lights, the familiar click of the switch, a small comfort. I tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter, then made my way over to the small table where the envelope was waiting. My hands shook slightly as I pulled it out. The wax seal still intact. It had been sealed for so long, and now I was the one breaking it open. Inside, there was no grand revelation, no flashy contracts or complex legalese, just a simple piece of paper and a flash drive. The paper was a single sheet, typed in a neat, professional font, the kind of text that didn't leave room for interpretation. To my granddaughter, Claire. You are the heir to the Walker legacy. But this inheritance isn't just about money or control. It's about understanding the cost of power and the consequences of using it. There are those who will try to take it from you, just as they tried to take it from me. Hold your ground. It was a reminder of the price that came with what I had inherited, not just the company, but the history, the people, and the dangerous webs of deceit that had been woven over the years. I glanced at the flash drive. My pulse quickened as I plugged it into my laptop. The file opened, and there was no mistaking the seriousness of what I saw. It wasn't just a collection of documents. It was a roadmap. A list of names. People who had been involved in shady deals, in manipulation, and power plays. My father had built an empire, but it wasn't on honest work or fair practices. It was built on backroom deals and unethical choices, and I was now at the center of it all. There was one name that kept appearing. Michael Hargrove, the CFO. My father's right-hand man. I had known Michael for years. He was always polite, always professional, but now, seeing his name so many times on these documents made my skin crawl. It was clear that he had been involved in every major decision, every shady deal, every manipulation. He had been the puppeteer behind the scenes, pulling the strings while my father took the credit. And then there was Ethan, my brother, the one who had always been the obedient son, the one who never asked questions. But now, with the documents before me, it was clear that he had been a part of this too. He had been complicit in keeping the family business running, even if it meant making unethical choices. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. This was no longer just about inheriting a fortune. It was about survival. It was about holding on to something my father had built while fighting off the vultures that had circled around him, and now, me, Michael, Ethan, Lauren, they would all try to take what was mine. But I wasn't going to let them. I wasn't going to play by their rules. The phone buzzed on the table in front of me, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Michael. Claire, we need to talk about the next steps. We need to discuss how we'll handle the company's transition. Your father and I had plans in place, and I believe it's best if we continue moving forward with them. I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. He thought I was going to roll over, let him continue pulling the strings just like my father had. I wasn't going to be his puppet. Not now. Not ever. I don't think we'll be moving forward with your plans, Michael. I'll handle the company my way. I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly as I hit send. I couldn't let myself be weak. I couldn't show them any sign of uncertainty. If I was going to survive this, I had to be stronger than they could ever imagine. And it started now. The fight for control had begun, and I wasn't backing down. I woke up the next morning with a sense of urgency that I couldn't shake off. My mind replayed everything I had learned the night before. The names on those documents, the deals, the lies, the company, my inheritance, and my grandfather's warning. The weight of it all pressed down on me. But the most pressing feeling was a strange kind of fear. The fear of what might come next. I wasn't just inheriting an empire, I was inheriting a battlefield. And I was the only soldier who hadn't been tainted by the system. The only one who wasn't already bought and sold. The sun barely peeked through the blinds as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty space in front of me. I had never wanted this. All my life, I had dreamed of something else. Peace, normalcy, a life outside the corporate chaos that had defined my family. I had joined the military for a reason. It was the one place where I felt like I could make a difference, where the mission mattered more than money or status. But now, here I was, stuck in a web of lies and power games, holding on to the very thing I had once run away from. I stood up, taking a deep breath. I couldn't let myself break. Not now. Not when I was standing at the edge of something much bigger than me. I needed to take action. The phone buzzed on the nightstand and I glanced at it. Another message from Michael. He was relentless. We need to have a conversation about today's meeting. It's crucial that we align on the company's direction. Your father would have wanted us to keep things stable. Let's talk soon. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I made myself a cup of coffee and stared out the window, watching the city wake up. I hadn't even been here for 24 hours, and already it felt like a lifetime. The past few years had been a blur. Deployment after deployment, pushing myself to the edge of exhaustion, always hoping that if I kept my head down and did my job, I could escape the web my father had spun around our family. But the war abroad had been nothing compared to the war I was about to face at home. Michael, Ethan, and Lauren, they had all been a part of it. They'd never questioned my father's decisions, never asked about the consequences. They were content to sit in the shadows, letting him make the tough calls while they reaped the rewards. I'd been different. I had walked away from all of it. But now, they were all watching me, waiting to see how I would play my hand. The meeting at the office was set for 10 a.m., and I knew it was time to face them. To look them in the eyes and show them that I wasn't the naive girl they remembered. I was the granddaughter of Marshall Walker, and I had inherited his strength, his vision, and his ability to outlast every challenge thrown my way. I arrived at the Walker Corporation building 30 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start. The glass doors of the high-rise building reflected the city's skyline, and for a moment, I wondered how it had all come to this. My family had built this empire, but it was crumbling under the weight of greed and corruption, and now it was mine to fix or destroy. I stepped out of the elevator on the 34th floor, my heels clicking sharply on the polished floors. The conference room was located at the end of the hall, and as I approached, I could hear the low murmur of voices inside. Michael, Ethan, Lauren. I knew they were already discussing their plans for the company plans that didn't include me. As I pushed open the door, all eyes turned toward me. Michael, sitting at the head of the table, gave me a tight smile. Ethan, my older brother, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking less than pleased to see me. Lauren, always the perfect picture of poise and confidence, watched me closely, her eyes narrowed, calculating. "Claire," Michael said, his voice smooth, almost too polite. "Glad you could join us." I said nothing, taking a seat at the far end of the table. I could feel their eyes on me, but I refused to show any sign of weakness. This was my moment, the moment I took control. "We need to discuss the direction of the company," Michael continued, his fingers tapping on the table. "There are key decisions that need to be made, and we believe it's best to continue with the plans your father and I had in motion." I raised an eyebrow. "Your father's plans," I corrected him. "Those plans are no longer relevant." The room went silent. Ethan shifted in his seat, and Lauren's gaze flickered with uncertainty. But Michael didn't flinch. He just smiled, the same smile I'd seen countless times over the years. The smile that said he thought he had me figured out. But he didn't. He had no idea who I was now. "I'm the one in charge now," I said, my voice steady. "And I'll be making the decisions from here on out." Michael's smile faltered. He glanced at Ethan, who seemed uncomfortable but said nothing. Lauren, on the other hand, looked me straight in the eye, her expression unreadable. Claire, Michael said slowly, leaning forward. You're still young. You don't understand the complexities of running this company. Your father— Don't bring up my father, I cut him off. He's gone. I'm here. And I'm not going to let this company continue down the path he started. There was a tension in the air, thick and palpable. They were all used to controlling everything, used to having the final say. But now, the tables had turned, and they had no idea how to react. I suggest we move forward with the transition plan as it is, Michael said, trying to regain his composure. The board has already approved the next phase of the expansion. I shook my head. I don't want to expand. Not with the foundation we have. First, we fix what's broken. We clean house, eliminate the corruption, and rebuild from the ground up. Michael looked incredulous. You can't be serious. The company is in a delicate position, and that's exactly why we need change, I interrupted. If we keep going the way we have, we're just digging our own graves. The silence in the room was deafening. For a moment, no one spoke. But then, Lauren spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. You're making a mistake, Claire, she said, her gaze softening just slightly. This isn't how things are done. You don't have the experience. You don't understand the stakes. I stood up from my chair, my hands clenched into fists by my sides. I don't need experience, Lauren. What I need is the truth. And the truth is, we've been running this company into the ground for years. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I could feel the weight of the moment, the turning of the tide. They hadn't expected this. None of them had. I'm not here to make friends, I continued. I'm here to make sure the Walker name means something again. Not just for us, but for the people who have worked for this company their whole lives. For the people we've hurt along the way. The room was still silent. Michael's face had turned pale, and Ethan was avoiding my gaze. Lauren sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I walked to the door, my back straight, my heart racing. I'll be in touch, I said coldly, before stepping out of the room and leaving them behind. As I walked back down the hall, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from my family. I wasn't hiding from the legacy they had forced upon me. I was embracing it, but on my terms. And this was just the beginning. The days following the meeting at Walker Corporation felt like a whirlwind, each moment building up like the pressure before a storm. I knew my family would not give up control easily. Michael, Ethan, and Lauren were not the type to surrender without a fight. But something inside me told me this wasn't going to be a fight I could avoid. The war had already begun. The day after the meeting, I found myself standing in the middle of my father's old office, a space that had once felt suffocating, but now felt oddly empty. The sleek, minimalist design of the room, with its glass walls and polished oak, made it clear that the world my father had built was built on illusion. There was nothing real about it. It was all smoke and mirrors. I sat down at his desk, running my fingers over the smooth surface, my mind racing through everything I had learned so far. I had so much power now, more than I'd ever wanted, but with that power came an overwhelming responsibility. I had inherited not just a company, but the ghosts of all the people who had built it. My father's vision, his mistakes, his alliances, and his betrayals, they were all tied up in this space. And now, they were mine to deal with. I opened the drawer, pulling out a stack of old files. My father's handwriting filled the pages, notes on meetings, investment strategies, names of people I didn't recognize, deals I didn't fully understand. But one name stood out: Lana Bishop. Lana had been a key player in the Walker family empire for years. She was a partner in several of my father's businesses, and my gut told me she was someone I needed to pay attention to. I picked up the phone and dialed the number written in the file. Walker Corporation. A voice on the other end answered. "This is Claire Walker," I said. "I need to speak with Lana Bishop, please." There was a pause on the other end. Miss Walker, she's out of the office at the moment, but I can schedule an appointment for you. No, I want to speak with her now. Tell her it's urgent. Another pause. Then a soft sigh. I'll let her know you're calling. Please hold. Moments later, the phone clicked, and Lana's familiar voice came through. Claire? She said, her tone wary. I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. I'm not calling to catch up, I replied bluntly. I need to know everything. About the company. About the deals. Everything my father did. And everything he didn't do. There was a long silence before she spoke again. You know this is not going to be simple, right? There are things your father. Things he didn't want you to know. I'm not afraid of the truth, I said, my voice hardening. I can handle it. She hesitated before speaking again. Fine. Let's meet. I'll send you the details. But remember this. The world your father built is not one you can just walk into and tear apart. There's a cost to every decision, Claire. A price. Before I could respond, the line went dead. The finality of the call hung in the air like a cloud. But I wasn't going to let fear dictate my next move. I had already made up my mind. If there was a price to pay, then I would pay it. The meeting was set for the next day. Lana suggested we meet at a cafe just outside of the city. When I arrived, I spotted her almost immediately. She sat at a corner table, sipping a cappuccino, her back straight, a thin veil of authority around her. Lana was always a force to be reckoned with. She had helped my father run things for years, but I suspected there was more to her than met the eye. I approached her table slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was ready for anything. I had to be. Claire, she greeted me, her voice warm but her eyes calculating. You've certainly wasted no time, I see. I sat down across from her, leaning forward slightly. I'm not here to waste time, Lana. I want answers. She studied me for a moment and then nodded, as if coming to a decision. All right. Let's get one thing straight. Your father was a businessman. A very good businessman. But not a good father. Not to you, not to anyone. The empire he built was just that, an empire. And empires crumble. I'm aware, I replied coldly. But I'm not here to talk about his failures. I want to know about my inheritance. What did he leave behind, really? And what did he do to make sure I couldn't take it back? Lana's eyes narrowed. You don't know the whole story. And trust me, you don't want to. But if you insist on going down this road, I'll tell you everything you need to know. Her words hit me harder than I expected, but I didn't let it show. I was prepared for the truth. Whatever it might be. Lana leaned back in her chair, sipping her coffee. Your father was brilliant. But he was also a manipulator. He made deals that weren't exactly legal. He had partnerships that were shady at best. But those partnerships kept the company afloat, and they gave him power. The kind of power you can't just let go of. I waited, letting her words sink in. And me? I asked. What part do I play in all of this? Lana gave me a rueful smile. Your father never wanted you involved. Not in the business, not in the company. He was determined to keep you away from all of it. But he also knew that if something happened to him, you'd be the one to inherit it all. That's why he made sure you weren't part of the board. That's why you were kept in the dark for so long. I swallowed, trying to keep my composure. So, you're telling me that my whole life has been a lie? That my father never wanted me to have any part of this? Not exactly, she replied, her voice softening. But yes. He made sure you wouldn't be involved. He didn't trust you to take over, not because you weren't capable, but because he didn't want anyone to challenge his control. He needed to be the one on top. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of her words settle heavily on my chest. And now that he's gone, Lana's expression hardened. Now, you're in charge, but don't think for a second that it's going to be easy. There are people who don't want you to have this. People who will stop at nothing to make sure you fail. My eyes narrowed. I'm not afraid of them. You should be, Lana warned. Because the price of power is always high. And you're about to pay it. As I left the cafe, the wind biting at my face, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. Lana had been right about one thing: my father had built an empire, but it was built on shaky ground. And now it was mine to hold together, or let it fall apart. I had no choice but to fight. But as Lana had said, there was a price to pay. And I was beginning to realize that I might be paying it sooner than I thought. The weight of Lana's words lingered with me long after our meeting. I couldn't stop thinking about them as I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights casting long shadows across the room. The realization hit me hard. My father had kept me in the dark, not because he wanted to protect me, but because he feared me. I was a threat to his power, and that was something I couldn't ignore anymore. The whole company, the empire that had been built on deceit, was now my responsibility. And that responsibility was more than just corporate stakes and board meetings. It was about survival. I had inherited everything. But now, it seemed as though everything was being taken away from me before I even had a chance to settle into the role. People were circling like vultures, waiting for my first misstep. I wasn't just fighting for control. I was fighting for my life. The next morning, I woke up to a phone call. I knew it wasn't good news before I even picked up. "Miss Walker, we need you here." "Now," a voice said on the other end of the line. It was Matthew, my father's most trusted assistant, someone I had barely spoken to in years. He'd been with the company longer than I could remember, which meant he had seen more than anyone. And I knew he wouldn't be calling, unless something had gone terribly wrong. "What's happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It's bad," Matthew replied, his voice tight with concern. "We've had a leak. Someone's been digging into your father's old files, and it's getting out of hand." A leak. The very thing I had been expecting. "How bad is it?" "Someone's already gone to the press. We've had calls from 3 major news outlets. They want to know about the company's dealings, about your father's past, about the corruption that's been going on for years." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What do we do?" "We need to move quickly. Meet me at the office in 2 hours. Bring your security. And don't trust anyone." I ended the call, my thoughts racing. Someone had gotten their hands on something dangerous. Something that could destroy everything I was trying to rebuild. The office was buzzing when I arrived. There was a tense energy in the air, a sense of panic that was hard to ignore. The PR team was already huddled together, trying to figure out how to manage the damage. Matthew was pacing back and forth, his face pale and stressed. I walked straight to him, my heels clicking against the marble floor. "What do we know?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. "It's not just the press," Matthew said, his voice low. "Someone within the company is leaking information. Files have gone missing, things have been tampered with. Your father's old business dealings, the ones he thought were covered, they're all coming to light." I swallowed hard. I couldn't afford this kind of scandal right now. Not when I was just beginning to take control. "Who's doing this?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "I don't know yet," he said, looking around nervously. "But we need to find out fast. If this gets into the wrong hands, it could destroy the company. And if it destroys the company, it destroys everything your father worked for and everything you've inherited." I glanced around the room, seeing the anxiety on everyone's faces. The walls were closing in, and I knew I had to act fast. "We need to contain this," I said, my voice firm. "Contact the lawyers. Get the legal team to block anything from going public. We'll handle the rest internally." Matthew nodded, but his expression was still tense. "And if that doesn't work, what if they already have everything they need? We'll deal with that when it happens, I said. Right now, we focus on damage control. And we find out who's behind this. As I sat in my father's old conference room, my mind raced through the possible suspects. Who within my father's circle would be ruthless enough to leak these secrets? I had enemies. I knew that. But I also had allies, people who would fight for me if they trusted me enough. I needed to find the mole before they could do more damage. The phone buzzed on the table in front of me, interrupting my thoughts. I picked it up and saw a message from Lana. Lana Bishop. You know there are more eyes on you than you realize. The press will be the least of your problems if you don't get control of your own people first. I stared at the screen for a moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Lana's cryptic message was a warning. I had been so focused on the external threats, the press, the shareholders, the company's reputation, but what if the real enemy was closer than I thought? I couldn't afford to trust anyone completely. Not yet. Not until I knew who was loyal and who was just waiting for the right moment to turn on me. I dialed a number from my contacts list. It was time to bring in someone who could help me with this mess. Someone who knew how to deal with internal politics and could keep things under control. Detective Carter, it's Claire Walker, I said when the call was answered. I need your help. Claire, he said, his voice gruff but calm. What's going on? I need you to do some digging for me. I need to know who's leaking information from inside my company. Someone's been sabotaging my father's legacy. I need to find them before it's too late. I'll get started, he said. But be careful, Claire. Whoever this is, they're good. They've covered their tracks. I know, I replied, my voice hardening. But that's why I'm asking you. I need someone who knows how to find the people who think they're invisible. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Meetings with the legal team, conference calls with the board, strategizing damage control with the PR team. But in the back of my mind, there was one thing I couldn't stop thinking about: the mole. The person who was betraying me from within. Someone who had access to everything, the files, the secrets, the heart of the empire my father had built. And they were using that information to tear it all down. By the time the evening came, I had a growing sense of unease in my stomach. The longer this dragged on, the closer the walls seemed to be closing in on me. As I left the office, I felt the weight of the day bearing down on me. My phone buzzed once more, and I looked down to see a message from Detective Carter. Detective Carter. I've got something. Meet me at my office. Now. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my coat, my heart racing as I made my way out into the cold night. This was it. The moment that could change everything. I arrived at Detective Carter's office as quickly as I could, the cold night air biting at my skin as I hurried down the empty street. The fluorescent lights above the small office flickered as I approached the door. It wasn't a fancy place, but that's why I trusted Carter. He wasn't into the showy business. He was quiet, efficient, and got things done. I pushed open the door, and the familiar scent of stale coffee and old paper greeted me. Carter was sitting behind his desk, a thick file open in front of him. The room was dimly lit, a single desk lamp casting shadows across his face. When he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, he gave me a small nod. You came, he said, his voice low and gruff, like it always was. I've got something you'll want to see. I walked in and took a seat across from him, my heart pounding in anticipation. I had to know. I had to know who was doing this to me, to my family, and why. You're not gonna like this, Carter added, his gaze intense as he flipped through the file. Just tell me, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He didn't waste time. The leak is coming from inside the company, he said, leaning forward. And it's not just some low-level employee. It's someone high up. I traced the leaks back to a few sources, but one name keeps popping up. Someone who's been feeding information to the press for months now. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who? Carter hesitated for a moment, then dropped the name. Lana Bishop. I froze. Lana. I had known her for years. She was the one person I thought I could trust in the company. We had shared drinks at company events, joked about the absurdity of our work, and bonded over shared experiences. But now, it seemed I was wrong. Lana had been playing me. And now, she was the one pulling the strings, leaking information, and watching it all unravel from behind the scenes. I swallowed hard. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Carter nodded. I ran the numbers, checked her connections. Everything. Lana's been in touch with reporters, lawyers, even some investors. She's been orchestrating a smear campaign against you, Claire. Slowly but surely, she's been undermining your every move. I leaned back in my chair, my thoughts racing. Why would Lana betray me like this? What was her motive? I had always considered her a friend, someone I could trust with anything, and yet here she was, working to destroy me. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "At least a few months," Carter said, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. "Maybe longer. She's been covering her tracks well, but I've got enough evidence now to prove she's been in communication with key players on the outside. She's the one who set up the meeting with the press." I couldn't believe it. How had I been so blind? How had I not seen it coming? I felt a surge of anger rise within me, but I kept it under control. There was no time for rage. I had to be calculated. Lana had to pay for what she'd done. But I couldn't make any rash moves. Not yet. I looked up at Carter. "What now?" "We need to confront her," Carter said. "We can't keep this quiet anymore. But we need to make sure we have everything we need to back you up. If we just accuse her without evidence, she'll turn it around on you. You need to be prepared for that." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I was used to the battlefield. This was just another war, a different kind, but still a battle. "We'll take it slow," I said, standing up. "We'll gather the evidence, make sure we've got her cornered. And when we do, we'll make her pay. But not until we've got it all." Carter watched me closely, his eyes sharp. "You sure about this?" "She's not just a colleague, Claire. She's someone you thought you could trust." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked over to the window, my reflection staring back at me in the glass. I barely recognized myself anymore. The girl who had come to the city to build something to honor her father's legacy was no longer here. In her place was someone cold, someone who knew the cost of betrayal. "I'm sure," I said finally, my voice low, but steady. "I'm done trusting the people who've only ever used me for their own gain. It's time to take control of this company. And it's time to take control of my life." I turned back to face Carter, my decision made. "Get me everything you have on Lana. Every email, every conversation, every move she's made. I want it all." The next few days were a blur. I spent every waking moment preparing for the confrontation with Lana. The stakes had never been higher, and I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The press was already spinning stories, and my father's past was starting to come to light in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had to protect what was left, and that meant taking down the one person who had the power to destroy me from the inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. As much as I wanted to focus on Lana, there were still bigger players in the game. I could feel the weight of the entire company watching me, waiting for me to fail. But failure was not an option. That night, I sat in my apartment, the blinds drawn, and stared at the files on my desk. The evidence was there, waiting for me to make my move. I wasn't going to give Lana the chance to get ahead of me. Not this time. The clock ticked past midnight. But I couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts were racing through my mind. The next step? The next move? The next betrayal? I... I... It was all one step after another, each one more dangerous than the last. And as I sat there, I made a vow to myself. I would finish this. I would win. Because this time, I wasn't just fighting for control of the company. I was fighting for my survival. The next morning, I stood outside Lana's office. The door was closed, but I could see her shadow through the frosted glass. My heart was pounding, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't here for a confrontation. I was here to make sure she never had the chance to betray me again. I knocked on the door. "Lana," I said, my voice firm and controlled. She didn't answer immediately. But I could hear her rustling on the other side, her heels clicking on the floor as she approached. The door swung open, and Lana stood there, looking completely caught off guard. She hadn't expected me not this soon. "Claire," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. "I didn't expect to see you today. Is everything all right?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We need to talk." Lana's eyes flickered for just a second. She knew something was off. But she didn't have time to react before I walked past her into her office. The office was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that thickens the air, making it hard to breathe. Lana's face was a mask of confusion, but I could see the glimmer of worry hiding behind her practiced composure. She wasn't as untouchable as she thought. I wasn't here to play games anymore. I turned to face her completely, crossing my arms, the evidence stacked neatly in front of me. My heartbeat was steady, every move deliberate. There was no room for hesitation. "I know what you've been doing, Lana," I said, my voice flat and unwavering. "I know everything." Lana's lips twitched, the smallest hint of a smile creeping across her face. It was a nervous tic, one she didn't realize was showing her hand. She'd seen the papers. She knew what was coming, but she wasn't prepared for how I was going to play it. "Claire, I think you're jumping to conclusions. There's been some misunderstanding," she said, her voice sweet, laced with fake innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about." I didn't blink. I wasn't here for her theatrics. "You've been leaking information to the press for months. You've been working with journalists, feeding them stories, and sabotaging my every move." The color drained from her face, just for a second. She quickly masked it with a forced calm. "I don't know what you're talking about. You've been under a lot of stress, Claire. Maybe you're—" "No, don't play that game with me," I cut her off. "I have all the proof I need, Lana. The emails, the phone records, the meetings with reporters you thought you could hide. I have it all. You thought you could destroy me from the inside, but you underestimated me." Lana took a step back, her eyes darting to the stack of papers on her desk, to the USB drive I had placed deliberately in front of her. The evidence was undeniable. There was no escaping it now. "You thought I wouldn't notice," I continued, my voice now rising slightly, the anger I'd been suppressing for so long simmering just below the surface. "But you were wrong. I always pay attention. I always see what's happening behind the scenes. And now, it's all coming back to you." She swallowed, her hands twitching, but she held her ground. "Claire, you don't know what you're talking about," she said, voice tight. This is all just a misunderstanding. You've been away for so long," I interrupted again, slamming my hand on the desk, making her flinch. "Don't play the 'you've been away too long' card, Lana. That's not going to work. You've been doing this to me for months, for your own gain. You've been feeding the press lies, poisoning the board, and now you're going to take the fall for it." For a split second, Lana's face went pale, and I knew then that I had her cornered. The smug confidence that had once defined her was slipping, and she knew it. "I didn't mean for things to go this far," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the mask cracking. "I was just trying to survive, Claire. I thought I could make a name for myself in this company. I thought it was the only way to prove myself." I took a step forward, leaning in, making sure she saw the fury in my eyes. "Survival? You wanted to survive by selling me out? By tearing this company apart? By ruining everything my family built? You used me, Lana. You used our friendship for your own gain. And you've crossed the line." Her eyes welled up, her carefully crafted exterior starting to crumble. She opened her mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. I could see the guilt, the regret, but it was too late for that. Her betrayal ran too deep. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my voice low, almost threatening. "You've made me a target. You've made my family the enemy of the public. Everything I've worked for, everything my father and grandfather built. You've tried to destroy it." Lana sank into her chair, her face pale as she stared down at her hands. She didn't have the answers anymore. She didn't have a way out. I could see the shame in her eyes, but that wasn't enough to undo the damage. "You've made your choices, Lana," I said, my voice final, cold. "And now, you'll face the consequences." There was a long, heavy silence between us, the weight of what was happening hanging in the air. It wasn't just a corporate battle anymore. It was personal. It had been personal from the start. And now, it was time for the reckoning. "I've already spoken to Carter," I added, watching her closely. "The evidence is airtight. We'll be going public with everything you've done." Lana's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. There was no denying it. The web she'd spun around herself was unraveling, and she was trapped in it. I could see the panic rising within her. "I never wanted it to come to this," she said quietly, her voice trembling now. "I didn't know how far it would go. I thought I was just what?" I cut her off, my anger bubbling to the surface once more. "You thought you could play this game without consequences? You thought you could stab me in the back and get away with it?" Lana closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just wanted a place in the company. I thought if I—" "Enough," I snapped. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." There was nothing more to say. I knew what I had to do. And Lana knew, too. The game had changed. I was no longer the victim in this. I was in control. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even someone I once considered a friend, take that away from me. I stood up, turning to leave. "Get your things in order, Lana. You'll have a lot of explaining to do when this all comes out." I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't need to. She had already lost. As I walked out of her office, I felt a strange sense of calm. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had the upper hand. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making her pay. It was about taking control back. Taking back what was mine. And I wasn't going to stop until I had everything: the company, the legacy, and my peace of mind. I walked out of Lana's office with a sense of finality in my step, but it wasn't over yet. The weight of what I'd just done settled on my shoulders, and for a moment, I had to stop and collect my thoughts. I needed clarity, not just for myself, but for the next steps. The truth was out, but that was only the beginning. I couldn't afford to let my guard down now. The corridors of the office were empty, eerily quiet as I made my way to the elevator. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, seeing a message from Carter. "I've got your back. We're going public tomorrow. Are you ready for the fallout?" I tapped out a quick reply, my fingers steady despite the chaos swirling around me. "Ready. Make sure everything's airtight. We don't get a second shot at this." I hit send and shoved the phone back into my pocket. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside. My reflection in the polished metal was stark. No makeup, no smiles, just the face of someone who had been tested and hardened by years of betrayal. But I was ready now. Ready to win. The ride down felt like an eternity. Every floor that passed was a reminder that my life had changed irrevocably. Lana's betrayal was just one piece of the puzzle, but it was the first domino to fall. There were still the board members, the investors, and most importantly, my father. And if he thought I was backing down, he was wrong. When I finally stepped into the lobby, I was greeted by an overwhelming sense of calm. The decision was made. No more running. No more hiding. For the first time in years, I was standing firm, and nothing would move me. As I exited the building, the cool air of the evening hit me, and I breathed it in deeply. The night sky was clear, stars twinkling above as if the universe itself was watching the shift in my world. It wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. Everything I had fought for, everything my family had worked for, was now on the line. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my address, zoning out as the city whizzed by outside. My mind replayed every conversation, every move Lana had made, every lie she had told. I could see it now, clearer than ever. She had underestimated me, thought she could break me. But in the process, she had only made me stronger. And now, it was time for her to pay for the consequences of her actions. When I arrived at my apartment, I took a moment to stand outside, just to let the weight of everything wash over me. The apartment building was quiet, the world outside unaware of the storm that was about to break. But I knew. And soon, everyone else would too. I walked upstairs and unlocked my door, stepping inside. The apartment felt empty. My mind kept returning to the moment in Lana's office. The look of defeat in her eyes. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for what was to come. But then I remembered. She had done this to herself. She chose this path. Now, she would have to face the consequences. The next few hours were a blur as I prepared for what was coming. I made the necessary calls to Carter, made sure everything was ready. By morning, the press would be all over the story. The leaks, the lies, everything would come to light. And then, there would be no going back for Lenore or anyone else involved. The first article hit the morning cycle like a sledgehammer. Claire Greaves, the heiress who returned from the dead to take back what was stolen. It was bold. It was brutal. And it was exactly what needed to be said. The media went wild. Bloggers, news outlets, and financial analysts were all over it. They didn't know the full story yet. But they didn't need to. The headline alone was enough to start the chaos. By the time I finished my coffee, my phone was blowing up with notifications from reporters, investors, and even some old family friends who were suddenly very interested in what was going on. I didn't answer any of them. The truth had been set in motion, and nothing could stop it now. I had made my move, and the pieces were falling into place. The world would see me for what I was, a woman who had been underestimated, who had been betrayed, but who was now taking control of her own fate. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was from my father. "We need to talk." I smiled. The calm before the storm. The real battle was just beginning. The storm of notifications on my phone continued through the morning, each ping a reminder of what was happening and what was yet to come. But I wasn't going to let the media frenzy distract me. No, today was about facing my father and claiming what was rightfully mine. I had waited too long for this moment to let anything, not the headlines, not the messages from reporters, not even the deep gnawing in my stomach, derail me. I stood in front of the mirror, taking a long, hard look at myself. My reflection was different now. I no longer saw the girl who had once followed orders, the obedient daughter who kept her head down and played along with the family games. I saw a woman who had fought for her place in the world, who had been through the fires of betrayal, loss, and uncertainty, and who was still standing, stronger than ever. "Time to get to work," I muttered under my breath, adjusting my blazer. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Carter. "They're circling. Media's starting to pick up on the fact that your father's assets are about to be frozen. Are you ready?" I didn't need to respond right away. Everything was in motion, and nothing was going to stop me now. I grabbed my purse, took a deep breath, and headed out the door. The next few hours would set the tone for everything. There was no turning back. The meeting with my father. The moment I stepped into the grand office building, my chest tightened. I had been here before, many times, but today it felt different. The polished wood floors, the gleaming marble walls, the cold, imposing sculptures, all of it felt like a reflection of the power and control my father had always wielded. the same power that had always kept me in check. I took the elevator up to the top floor, where my father's office awaited. As the doors opened, I was met with the familiar sight of his sprawling office. It was cold and sterile, filled with luxurious furniture that looked more like it belonged in a museum than an office. The walls were lined with framed awards, contracts, and business deals, each a testament to his success, his supposed success, anyway. Claire. My father's voice cut through the silence, cold and measured as always. I see you've decided to show up. I glanced at him across the room, standing by the large window, his back to me. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, but it was a smirk I had seen 1,000 times before, one that said he thought he had the upper hand. But not today. Today, I was in control. I've been busy, I replied, my tone steady, firm. But I'm here now. And it seems we have a lot to discuss. He turned to face me, his cold eyes narrowing as they met mine. I don't know what you think you're doing, Claire. The media, the leaks, it's all nonsense. You're embarrassing yourself. I raised an eyebrow, unfazed. Embarrassing myself? Is that what you think this is about? I took a step forward, meeting his gaze head on. I'm not the one who's been running a game behind closed doors. I'm not the one who's been lying, manipulating, and stealing from my own family. His face reddened. He took a step toward me, his voice rising. You don't know what you're talking about. This company, this legacy, it's all I've worked for. And you've destroyed it. I didn't flinch. I didn't destroy anything. You did. You and your puppets. Lana, the board, everyone who thought they could erase me and take everything that was mine. I placed a hand on the desk, leaning in. But you're wrong. You can't erase me. Not anymore. He clenched his jaw, eyes flashing with anger. You think you can just waltz in here and take it all? After everything I've done for you? After everything I've given you? He sneered, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You're nothing but a mistake. I'll make sure of that. I met his gaze with a calm I didn't even know I had. You never gave me anything, Dad. You took my future, my name, my identity. But that ends now. The company is mine. The inheritance is mine. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. There was a long, tense silence. He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, doubt, maybe fear, a realization that things were slipping out of his control. You think you can just waltz in and take everything from me? He growled again, the anger rising in his voice. You're my daughter. I made you. No, I replied quietly, the words cutting through the air. I made myself, and I'm done playing by your rules. The moment of truth. I stood there, facing my father, for what felt like an eternity. But in reality, it was only a few minutes. He was breathing heavily, his fists clenched, but there was something else in his eyes now. Something unfamiliar. The man who had always been so confident, so sure of himself, was starting to crack. You don't know what you're up against, he warned, his voice lower now, almost pleading. I'm not going to let you take this company from me, Claire. I'll fight you to the end. Then let's fight, I said, a cold smile playing on my lips. But know this, you'll never win. Not against me, not anymore. I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking sharply on the marble floors. Behind me, I heard him call out my name. But I didn't turn around. He didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about him. It was about me, about everything I had earned. Everything that had been taken from me. As I left the building, I felt the weight of the battle that lay ahead, but I also felt something else. A sense of freedom. I had done it. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming what was rightfully mine, and nothing was going to stop me now. The following days were a blur of strategic meetings, frantic phone calls, and hours spent reviewing documents I had never imagined I would need to understand. The media frenzy hadn't quieted down. If anything, it had only intensified. Headlines screamed about the scandal at Braden Enterprises, the fraudulent will, and my sudden reappearance after being declared dead. Every piece of information they could find about me was twisted and amplified for the world to see. My phone buzzed incessantly, messages flooding in from all directions. But I didn't care about the noise. I had a bigger plan now, and it was time to execute it. I had no intention of letting the press or my father's PR machine manipulate the narrative anymore. I needed to hit them where it would hurt the most. Their credibility. My first step was to make sure the truth came out, the real truth, not the one they had been spinning. I called in all the favors I had. Lawyers, journalists, old contacts from my military days. I was building an army, not just for myself, but for the truth. Sylvia had warned me this fight would be long. But now, more than ever, I understood what she meant. This wasn't about some public showdown or flashy headlines. This was about taking back everything they had tried to steal from me. My family, my identity, my legacy. My father's next move was predictable. He wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially when he felt cornered. But I knew he would do it differently this time. He wasn't going to take me on directly, not yet. Instead, he was going to attack from the shadows, trying to undermine my every step. I had no doubt he had his own team working tirelessly to erase the evidence, manipulate the truth, and spin the narrative in his favor. But this time, I had the power to stop him. I had the evidence, the legal backing, and the one thing he underestimated, my resolve. The night before our next legal battle, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my apartment, the glow of my laptop the only light in the dark room. Documents sprawled out on the floor, each piece of paper representing a battle I had already won or one I was about to fight. I'd been through wars before, literal wars, but this was different. This was personal. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for something much bigger, for the future that was stolen from me, and the future I would build for myself and those who needed someone to fight for them. I glanced at the framed picture on the wall, me and Grandpa, sitting on the porch, both of us smiling. It had been taken just before I left for my first deployment, the day I made the decision that would change everything. Grandpa had always believed in me, even when no one else did. He knew what I was capable of. He saw in me the same fire that had once burned in him. That fire was what I carried with me into every fight, and tomorrow it was going to burn brighter than ever. The next morning I arrived at the courthouse with a quiet confidence. No nerves. No second guessing. I was ready. I walked through the heavy wooden doors, my heels echoing through the empty hallways, the sound of them punctuating the silence. My legal team had already arrived. They were sharp, focused, and ready for what was to come. Sylvia stood at the front of the room, her usual calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the chaos I felt inside. She gave me a nod of encouragement as I took my place at the table. The courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. News cameras lined the back, and reporters crowded at the edges of the room, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the drama that was about to unfold. My father was already seated at the opposing table, his lawyer whispering in his ear. But it wasn't just my father I was worried about. I had learned long ago that it wasn't always the person in front of you that you had to watch out for. It was the people behind the scenes, the ones who whispered lies into the ears of those in power. Today, I wasn't just fighting my father. I was fighting everyone who had ever used their power to silence me, to erase me. And I was done being silent. The judge entered. A stern woman with a reputation for fairness and no tolerance for nonsense. She called the proceedings to order, and the room fell silent. My father's lawyer stood up, smoothing his suit as he addressed the court with a practiced smile. Your Honor, we are here today to contest the legitimacy of the claims made by Miss Claire Braden. The document in question is based on a fraudulent will, one that we believe was manipulated to benefit Ms. Braden at the expense of the rightful heirs. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. But it didn't faze me. I knew what was coming. I had prepared for this moment for months. When it was my turn, I stood up, my back straight, my posture commanding the room's attention. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady. "This is not a case of inheritance. This is not a family dispute. This is a case of fraud, of lies that have been told to erase me from my family's history." I paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. My grandfather left me everything, not as a gift, but as a legacy, and it is my duty to protect that legacy. But my father and those who have been complicit in this conspiracy have tried to steal it from me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the room's gaze on me. I knew I had to make every word count. "I have evidence," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I looked directly at my father, my eyes unblinking. "I have proof that the will was forged. I have proof that my name was stolen, that my identity was erased." I slid the stack of documents forward, and the room fell into an eerie silence as the judge began flipping through them. It was my father's turn to squirm. His usual confidence faltered as he glanced nervously at his lawyer, who was now frantically scanning the documents. The evidence was undeniable. The forged signatures, the manipulated financial documents, it was all there. It was a web of lies that had been carefully constructed over years. But now, the truth was unraveling piece by piece. My father stood up, trying to regain some semblance of control, but it was too late. The truth had already been set in motion, and there was no turning back. The judge turned her attention to him. "Mr. Braden, do you have anything to say in your defense?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The room was waiting, but he had no more lies to tell. He had been exposed. The judge leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "I believe we have all the evidence we need. This case will proceed accordingly." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't allow myself to show it. This was just the beginning. The real fight was still ahead. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure: I had won. The air inside the courthouse was thick with anticipation. I could feel it pressing against me, trying to force me into a corner, to make me doubt myself. But I wasn't afraid anymore. After years of being manipulated, erased, and forgotten, I had finally found my footing. This wasn't just about proving that I was alive, it was about claiming the life I'd always deserved. My father's defeat was looming, but the fight was far from over. As the judge's gavel slammed down, signaling the end of the day's proceedings, I could feel the weight of the moment settle over me. I had laid the groundwork, but there was so much left to do. Tomorrow was just another battleground in a war that had been waging for far too long. I stepped out of the courtroom, feeling the rush of adrenaline start to fade as the real consequences of what I was doing began to sink in. The hallway was crowded with reporters, their cameras flashing like a swarm of angry bees. But I ignored them. I had faced far worse in my life than a few flashing lights. I was done pretending to be invisible. The walk to the parking lot was silent. The sound of my boots echoing on the marble floors was the only thing that broke the quiet. Sylvia, ever the calm and collected strategist, walked beside me, her face unreadable. "That went better than expected," she said finally, breaking the silence. I nodded. But I couldn't let myself relax yet. This was only the first battle. And I knew better than anyone that the war wasn't won in one day. "You still have to watch your back," she added, reading my mind. "Leonard will play dirty. You can't let your guard down." "I know," I said, my voice firm. "But I'm not backing down now. I can't. Not after everything." We reached my car, and I got in without a word, the weight of the day still hanging heavily on my chest. The evidence I had presented was powerful, but it wasn't going to be enough to end this. Leonard wasn't the type to just admit defeat. He would claw, scratch, and burn through everything in his path if it meant holding on to the control he thought was his by right. I couldn't let that happen. "Do you have everything ready for tomorrow?" Sylvia asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. I have what I need. It's time to bring everything into the light. We both knew what this meant. The media frenzy would only grow stronger, and there was a real chance the corporate board would try to shut me out again. But I wasn't backing down. Not when the truth was finally on my side. Not when I could see the pieces falling into place. The drive home was uneventful, but my mind raced with plans. The evidence I had gathered was just the tip of the iceberg. I knew the kind of fight Leonard was capable of, but I also knew what I was capable of now. I had lived in the shadows for too long. No longer. Now, it was my turn to step into the light. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every detail of the case replayed in my mind. The documents, the signed affidavits, the legal filings, it was all there. But the hardest part, the one that would define everything, was yet to come. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance. I was fighting for the right to exist in my own family's history. I was fighting for my name. The next day came too soon. I woke to the sharp ring of my phone, and for a split second I thought it was a nightmare. But it was real. It was Sylvia, and her voice was grave, the kind of voice that makes your stomach drop. "We've got a problem," she said without preamble. "They've filed an injunction." My heart sank. Leonard wasn't wasting any time. "What's the angle?" I asked, though I already knew. He would try anything to delay the inevitable. Anything to keep control of Braden Enterprises. "They're claiming that the evidence you presented was tampered with. They've got experts lined up to discredit the signatures," Sylvia said. "They're also trying to accuse you of being mentally unfit to handle the company. It's a dirty play, but we can handle it." I gripped the phone tightly. "What do we do?" "We fight," she said simply. "We go on the offensive. We have to force them to show their cards before they get the chance to make their next move. We'll take this to the media. It's time to turn the tables." I nodded, though my mind was already spinning with the logistics of the next steps. "I'm ready." The courtroom was packed the next morning, and I could feel the tension as I walked in. The media was on edge, hungry for the next twist in this saga. The air felt thick, like everyone was waiting for the storm to break. Leonard sat at his side of the courtroom, his usual smirk gone. Now, his eyes were narrow, calculating. He knew his time was running out, but he wasn't about to give up without a fight. His lawyer stood by him, ready to make their case. But we were ready too. I took my seat, looking around the room. The judge, stern and impartial, was already reviewing the motions. My legal team stood ready, and Sylvia sat beside me, her presence a steady anchor. I could feel her calm strength. But I knew this would be the hardest battle yet. The proceedings began with the usual formalities, but it wasn't long before Leonard's lawyer made his move. "Your Honor, we are here to present evidence that the documents presented by Miss Braden have been tampered with," he said smoothly. "These signatures are not authentic, and we have expert testimony to prove that." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. The game was on. Sylvia stood first, calm and composed. "Your Honor, we have already provided all necessary evidence. Any attempt to discredit the documents is just a last-ditch effort to save face. We are prepared to prove the legitimacy of these records." The room fell into a heavy silence. My heart raced as Sylvia laid out our case. She was sharp, methodical, and I could see the cracks in Leonard's defense beginning to show. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. We needed the final blow. That's when I spoke up. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady but firm. "The truth cannot be erased. It doesn't matter how many experts they bring in or how many lies they tell. I have lived my entire life in the shadow of this family's lies. Today, I am bringing the truth to light." I could feel the room's attention shift, all eyes on me. Sylvia gave me a small nod of approval. I turned to face Leonard, my gaze unwavering. "The only thing standing between me and what's rightfully mine is fear. Your fear. You fear losing control. Fear that the truth will expose everything you've worked so hard to hide. But this time, the truth will win. There was a long, tense silence as the judge looked over the evidence before her. Leonard's lawyer stood frozen, unable to respond. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the decision. The judge's gavel came down, cutting through the tension. "Based on the evidence presented and the testimony heard, I find in favor of Miss Braden," she said, her voice firm. It was over. The battle had been won, but I knew that the war was far from finished. This was just the beginning. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The decision had been made. My heart still raced in my chest, but I couldn't let myself be consumed by relief just yet. I had won the battle. But there was still so much left to fight for. The truth had emerged, but it was only the beginning of what would be a long, relentless war. Leonard sat rigid in his chair, his face ashen, the weight of the verdict slowly sinking in. His lawyer, still in shock, shuffled through papers, trying to salvage what little dignity remained. I could see the storm brewing in Leonard's eyes, the rage boiling just beneath the surface. He wasn't a man who lost easily, and I knew he wouldn't just walk away. No. He would come back stronger. He would play his last cards with desperation, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. Sylvia leaned in, her voice low but steady. "This isn't over. Leonard will drag this out for as long as he can. We have to move fast." I nodded. "I'm not going to let him take this from me. Not now. Not ever." We walked out of the courtroom together, my heart still pounding, the weight of the decision looming over me. But as the door swung closed behind me, a new wave of determination surged through me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything my grandfather had worked for. Everything I had fought for. The foundation of Braden Enterprises. The legacy of my name it. Was all at stake. The media was in full frenzy, the cameras flashing as reporters clamored for a statement. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to win. They thought the family name would be enough to bury me, but they had underestimated the fire inside me. I wasn't a pawn in their game anymore. I was the queen, and it was time for them to realize that. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me, but it was a comfort, grounding me in reality. I took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment I had been working toward for so long. The future was in my hands, and I was ready to fight for it. "Rowan," Sylvia said, pulling me from my thoughts. "We need to move on this now. The press is going to escalate. You need to take control of the narrative." I turned to her, my resolve strengthening. "I've spent too long hiding in the shadows. It's time to step into the light." We headed back to the office, and I felt a surge of power wash over me. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance anymore. I was fighting for the right to exist on my own terms, to define who I was and what I stood for. The next few days passed in a blur. We began preparing for the media blitz, putting together a strategy to ensure that the truth didn't get buried in the noise. Sylvia was in her element, directing everything with the precision of a seasoned general. Meanwhile, I worked with my legal team to ensure that every move was calculated. I had everything I need: documentation, evidence, public support. But there was still one thing I had to do. I had to face Leonard. I had to make him see that the game was over. The call came 2 days later. It was Leonard's lawyer, asking for a meeting. My gut twisted, but I didn't hesitate. I agreed. This was it, the final confrontation. The meeting was set for the following afternoon at a private conference room in a downtown high-rise. I knew what Leonard would try to do. He would try to intimidate me, to appeal to whatever family ties we had left. He would beg, threaten, and manipulate. But I was done being manipulated. I wasn't a scared little girl anymore. I had a purpose, and I wasn't backing down. Sylvia and I arrived early, scanning the room before sitting down at the long wooden table. The room was sleek, corporate, the walls lined with expensive artwork. Leonard had always been obsessed with appearances, and this space was a reflection of his ego. As we waited, I could feel my nerves tightening, but I reminded myself this was the final battle. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about taking back my life, about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The door opened, and Leonard walked in. His expression was cold, calculating. He hadn't changed. He still carried that same air of superiority, like he owned the world. His lawyer followed closely behind, carrying a briefcase that probably held nothing but empty threats. He didn't acknowledge me at first, walking straight to his seat at the head of the table. I could see the tension in his posture, the way he clenched his fists. This was the moment he had been dreading. "Rowan," he finally said, his voice clipped. "I didn't think you'd have the guts to come back." I met his gaze, not flinching. "You underestimated me." His lawyer cleared his throat, trying to steer the conversation back to business. "We're here to discuss the terms of the estate, Rowan. You know as well as I do that this whole thing has been a mess from the beginning. There's a way out of this for everyone." I leaned back in my chair, my arms crossed. "You're right about one thing, Leonard. It has been a mess. But not for me. For you." He shot me a look, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything from me? You think you can steal my company? My legacy?" I didn't hesitate. "You never earned it. You never understood it. You only ever wanted it for your own ego. And now, you're going to lose it. Because I'm not backing down." Leonard's face twisted in anger, but he held himself in check, knowing this wasn't the time to lash out. "You think the world will believe your little crusade? You've already tried to destroy everything I've built. People won't follow you. They never have." I felt a flicker of something cold and sharp in my chest. "They will follow the truth. And the truth is, I'm the one who's been erased. I'm the one who's been left out of the family legacy. I'm the one who deserves to lead Braden Enterprises. And when this is all over, I will be the one on top." Leonard stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was flushed with rage. "You think you're better than me? You think you can just come in here and take everything from me? You're nothing but a traitor." I stood up slowly, meeting his fury with calm. "You made me a traitor. You made me disappear, erased my very existence. And now you'll see what happens when you push someone too far." Sylvia, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke up. "Leonard, this isn't a negotiation. This is a reckoning. Your time is up." For the first time, Leonard faltered. He looked from Sylvia to me, the reality of the situation beginning to sink in. "You won't win," he spat. But his words lacked conviction. "Watch me," I said softly, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. This was it. This was the end of everything he had built on lies, and the beginning of something new. The final battle was over, and I had won. But as I walked out of that room, the gravity of the victory hit me. There would be more battles to come, but I had finally reclaimed my place in the world. The fight for my name, my legacy, had just begun. And I was ready to face whatever came next. This time, I wasn't backing down. The air was thick with tension as I left the high-rise building. The victory was mine, but it felt hollow, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Leonard had made his threats, his desperate pleas, but I knew deep down he was a man running out of options. He had played every card he could, and now he was left with nothing but empty promises. I stood outside, the cool breeze of late fall brushing against my skin, a sharp contrast to the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I had won the legal battle. I had reclaimed my birthright, but at what cost? There was no satisfaction in the victory. It was just the beginning of a new chapter that was filled with uncertainty. Sylvia had stayed behind to handle the media frenzy that was sure to follow. She was a master at spinning the narrative, ensuring that the truth would be heard loud and clear. She had given me the space I needed to process everything, to prepare for what was coming next. But I wasn't sure I was ready for the full weight of what lay ahead. I walked to my car, the familiar sound of my boots echoing in the quiet parking garage. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I had won, but there was still so much to rebuild. Braden Enterprises was mine now. But it wasn't just about the company, it was about my identity, my place in this world. The drive back to my apartment felt like a blur. I wasn't thinking about the future, about the empire I now owned. I wasn't thinking about the revenge I had taken or the family I had left behind. I was thinking about the small things about the years I had lost, about the way my life had been stolen from me, about the pieces of me I had to leave behind in order to survive. I pulled into the parking lot of my building and sat in my car for a moment, staring at the empty space in front of me. The apartment had always been a temporary place for me, a place I stayed because it was all I could afford. But now, it felt like the only thing that had ever truly belonged to me. I got out of the car and walked up to the door, my mind spinning. I didn't know what I was doing next, but I knew that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. I had taken the first step in reclaiming what was mine, but there was still so much work to do. The battle wasn't over yet. It would never be over. Inside, the apartment felt emptier than usual. The walls seemed to close in around me as I dropped my bag on the floor and sank into the couch. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I didn't need to check it. I already knew who it was. It was Sylvia updating me on the latest developments. I picked up the phone and answered without saying a word. "Rowan," Sylvia said, her voice calm but firm. "The media is starting to turn in your favor. People are finally starting to see you for who you are. You've got this, but there's still work to be done. The board's meeting tomorrow. You need to be there. Show them you're in control." I sighed, leaning back against the couch. "I know. I'll be there." "Good. And Rowan, don't let them make you doubt yourself. You've fought for this. You've earned it. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Her words felt like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of uncertainty. I knew she was right. This was my moment. No one could take that away from Minot Leonard, not anyone. I hung up and sat in silence for a while, thinking about everything that had led me here. The fight, the loss, the sacrifice. It had all led me to this point. I had been forced to become someone I didn't recognize, someone who had to fight for everything she wanted, but now I could see the path forward. The company, the legacy, it was all mine. The next day, I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection staring back at me. I had become a stranger to myself over the years, but now I saw someone who was stronger, someone who had weathered the storm and come out on the other side. The woman I had been before was gone, but in her place was someone who knew what it meant to fight for what was hers. I put on my best suit, tailored, sleek, and professional, and stepped out the door. This was it. The final step. The last battle. The boardroom was packed when I arrived, the tension palpable in the air. Leonard was already seated at the head of the table, his face a mask of frustration and anger. Era sat beside him, her posture stiff, as if she were bracing herself for something she knew was coming. I took my seat at the far end of the table, my gaze meeting Leonard's. He didn't flinch. He never did. But I could see the cracks in his armor, the way he was starting to lose control. "You've made your move," Leonard said, his voice cold. "But this company doesn't belong to you. It never will." I didn't react. I didn't need to. I had already won. I had the evidence, the power, and the truth on my side. It was only a matter of time before they all realized it. "I'm in control now," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "And I'm going to take this company to places you never could." The board members shifted in their seats, glancing nervously at each other. Leonard's grip on the table tightened, but he didn't speak. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of my words. For the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. He knew this was over. He knew I was the one who had won. "I'm not going anywhere," I continued. "And neither is this company. It's going to grow. It's going to thrive. And it's going to be built on integrity and hard work, not greed and manipulation." Era opened her mouth to speak, But I raised my hand, silencing her. You had your chance, I said. But now it's my turn. The room was silent for a moment longer before the board members began to speak. One by one, they offered their support, backing me as the new leader of Braden Enterprises. I had done it. I had taken control. I had reclaimed my birthright. As the meeting ended, I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The battle was over. The war had been won. And now, it was time to rebuild. I walked out of that boardroom knowing that nothing, not even the ghosts of my past, could stand in my way. The phoenix had risen, and nothing would ever be the same again.